You are a sad person. Return to Seoul is up next on Rediscovered Movies. Hello, welcome to an episode of Rediscovered Movies. I'm your host, Nomfanelo. So, the film that I'll be discussing today is Return to Seoul. Return to Seoul is a 2022 Cambodian drama film. It's written and directed by Davy Chou, who's known for films such as Diamond Island and Les Sommeil Duo. The film stars Park Ji-min, Guka and Yoann Zimmer. Here is the synopsis. A 25-year-old French woman returns to Korea, the country she was born in, before being adopted by a French couple for the very first time. She decides to track down her biological parents, but her journey takes a surprising turn. So the film was released in Cambodia on November 18th, 2022. Here in the US and Canada, it was released in limited theaters on February 17th, 2023. In terms of box office, it has made over $1.6 million worldwide. In North America, it opened at number 33 with $27,315. It was beaten by films including Ant-Man 3, Avatar The Way of Water, and Magic Mike's Last Dance. In terms of critical reception, on Rotten Tomatoes, it has a 97% critic score, where they say, sensitively attuned to its protagonist's quest, the film uses one woman's story to explore universal truths about the human condition. The audience gave it 94%. It won two Asia Pacific Screen Awards, including Best Director. At the time of this recording, it is available on demand, so check your local provider. Let's get into first discoveries. So, I heard about this movie during award season 2022, so I decided to check the trailer out, which looked interesting. So, eventually, I rented the movie on the Cineplex store, and I found it was quite emotional because it has a resonating story, like with the themes on adoption, sense of belonging, and all that stuff. So I thought that was quite fascinating to see. And I thought everyone did a great job, particularly with the lead actress, Park Ji-min. And there were some issues I found with structure and pacing, but I found overall, it's a fascinating watch of this movie. And I do want to say that the director, David Chow, he appeared on an episode of Script Apart podcast, which I do recommend you guys check out, where essentially he breaks down the script. Let's get into the highlights. So, I think one of the main themes is that it deals with adoption and sense of belonging. So we see Freddie, she wants to connect with people, but doesn't want to get close to them at the same time. So here's an example. So, for instance, she sleeps with a guy that she met at a restaurant, and but then later on, he wants to, I guess, develop the relationship further by giving her a gift that she refuses to open, and she would often claim that she has a boyfriend in Paris, which leaves the guy pretty sad about it. And another example, I think the main example, is when she meets Freddie's dad. Because obviously, like, it's a very tough moment for her because she's going through a lot of emotions and all that stuff. But we see with Freddie's dad and his family, they want to reconnect after feeling sorry for abandoning her when she was a child because the country was unsafe at the time. But we see she's very cold, particularly towards the father. I think because she is really hurt about being abandoned and all that stuff, but also too, I think partly she just doesn't want to be forced into a situation, that makes her uncomfortable. Because the father wants her to move to Korea, essentially stay with the family and marry a Korean man, but she obviously refuses that because she is used to her life in France. So I found that was fascinating. But at least like the family, they try to do attempts to reconnect. Where, for example, we see with Freddie's dad and the family, they look at Facebook photos of Freddie growing up, which are fascinating, and then they decide also to show some home videos of the family. So I thought that was a nice moment for them to try to reconnect as a family. And I want to talk about the music. So I thought the score was fine, but really I want to mention that with the music plays, I would say, important role like for both Freddie and her father. So with Freddie, she mentions at the beginning that she was a musician, but she's not practicing it for unknown reasons. But she does, in ways, reference music quite often, because when we see she's at the restaurant with Tenna, she decides to do a little experiment called sightseeing, where she tries to bring different people together from the restaurant to come together and have a good time, which she does with some of the patrons at the bar, particularly when we see her talking with the group of guys, including the guy that she slept with. And then she brings the women from the restaurant, and they all seem to have a good time drinking and all that sorts of stuff. And we see like later on in the movie, I think towards the end, she goes back to doing music. We're not sure if she's doing it as a career at that point, but we see her playing the piano towards the end, after debating whether to leave the hotel. So I thought that was a nice, like, full circle moment for her character. And with her father, he is a composer of some sorts, because we see him when years later she reconnects with him. He plays a song that he composed on the piano from his phone, so which was a nice moment that everyone enjoyed. And yeah, because seems like with Freddie, even though like she tries to in ways detach herself from music, she can't help it but use it in her daily life. Like with the sightseeing exercise with Tenna and Dongwon and the people she brings at the restaurant. And also too during like her conversation with Andre, like when they're at the restaurant, she asked him if she could hear the music, which is like the sounds in the background, which I'm sure like for Andre and everyone would be like, oh, it's just whatever. But for her, like hears something different, which she correlates to music. And this movie deals with culture clash. So Freddie, she essentially grew up in France, even though she was born in South Korea. And the father, her father wants her to move to South Korea and to get married, have a stable life, that sort of deal. But Freddie refuses because she is comfortable as a French woman. And it's interesting that when she's with Freddie's dad and the family, they mostly speak South Korean, because I believe if Freddie's dad's wife translates what they're saying in English. So, because yeah, it seems like at that point in the movie, she's not interested in conforming to those traditions, because I guess she's comfortable where she is. But then we see later in the movie, I guess she's willing to give it a try, particularly when she tries to communicate with her mother. So yeah, because I find in ways that's relatable, like for people who were born, let's say, in a country that's outside of where, let's say, the parents or extended family were born into. And I do want to mention too that with Dongwon, he recites a Mongolian poem called "Land of My Birth." And I don't remember the exact words, but like when he was trying to recite that, when he's trying to translate that to French, I thought, oh, like this seems relatable to Freddy, especially with how it plays out with the rest of the movie. Also, too, I want to mention with Tenna, her translations. It's interesting how that, especially when Freddy, you know, tries to be blunt with her dad in particular. Um, Tenna like does not want to be rude because I guess she respects her elders and all that sorts of stuff. So she essentially tries to do like a clean version of what Freddy is saying to, I guess, not offend the family and all that stuff. So I'm like, oh, good for Tenna. But I mean, at the same time, I guess like Freddie probably doesn't know what Tenna is saying when she tries to communicate with the family. But I thought that was an interesting choice for Tenna to do like a clean version of Freddie's, dialogue to the family. And Freddie, she is a quite a complex character because she's quite spontaneous, particularly when we first see her on screen. Because we see like with Tenna, she's listening to music, then Freddie just shows up out of nowhere, and they, I guess, hit it off as the film goes. But really, like, she just loves to, I guess, do things on the go, perhaps. Um, I don't know, maybe because in ways she has fun being spontaneous. Not sure. Because, like, for instance, apparently with her trip to South Korea was not planned because there were some issues with her flight, which was mentioned during her conversation with her adoptive mother. And yeah, because Freddie is quite a fascinating character, and I'm sure with the actress had a great time playing that character in this movie. And she's also with Freddie very blunt with her words, especially when she hurls insults towards her father, particularly about the text messages that he keeps sending, because I guess he has a hard time trying to say that in person. So I guess through text, he's able to communicate that easy, but clearly with Freddie, she is not into that until I guess years later when they reconnect. And she's not an open book though, because she's not afraid to say, I guess, her opinion, but at the same time, she doesn't want to let people in to her life closely. Because an example is when she is waiting for the taxi to leave her father's place. And it's interesting that the way that it's framed on camera, it's a wide shot where we see like the dad and the rest of the family on one side, and then Freddie's on the other side. Does not say anything. Then once she gets in the cab, she leaves. So I thought that was a interesting choice from a filmmaking perspective. And so, in terms of scenes, I want to talk about the opening sequence. So, it's interesting that when Tenna asked Freddie about reservation, all that stuff, Freddie, she just smiles and asks, oh, what music you listening to? And then she listens to the music on the headphones, which she gets into. So I thought that was an interesting choice. And then Tenna, like, she obviously takes an interest in Freddie because Tenna is quite a timid character in this movie. So that's an interesting start to show, I guess, their relationship, especially how it pans out later in the movie. And another scene is when Freddie, Tenna, and Freddie's dad was inside the car. So, from filmmaking's perspective, we see the shots are limited to the father. We see the backside of the father driving, but his face is on the mirror. And then we see Freddie. She's in the back seat, just looking off to the side. And with Tenna's dialogue is off screen until there's like that shot like towards the end of the conversation. So I thought that was interesting choice. I guess it shows the lack of, I guess, what connection between the characters. So I thought that was cool to watch. And so also there's a moment when Freddie leaves the ballet shoes beside the bench. I don't know if it's a park, but it looks like a foresty area. And I guess here it shows that yeah, like she just wants to reject whatever like her father wants her to be, I suppose, because she refers to her shoes as ballet shoes. Because of ballet, like it's very strict in terms of what to wear and how to move and all that sorts of stuff, and Freddie's not into that. So I thought that was interesting, that essentially the father, if you go before, he, sorry, wants her to pick out shoes from this mini flea market that's by the sea, and she was not interested. But then I guess after he, keeps insisting, she picked out those shoes, and we don't see her wearing those shoes at all. And then we see those shoes again until she takes out the bag and heads off her way. Interesting. And also, to a moment, Freddie meets her biological mother at the Hammond Adoption Center towards the end. Because we see like the close up of Freddie, and then the mother is like in the background, out of focus, until she embraces Freddie. Um, I thought that was quite an emotional scene because like Freddie's crying as the mother is like embracing her, and then we see the mother give her the note. I have some more notes on the mother I'll explain in the next section, but I thought that was a nice moment to see mother and daughter reconnecting after so many years. And lastly, for highlights, this was quite a funny moment where during the restaurant sequence near the beginning, when Freddie and the group of people that she met, they're playing like this rabbit game. In the background, we see looks like some guy was sleeping at the restaurant. I thought that was hilarious because he had the blankets and everything. So I'm just wondering, oh, is this like in the restaurant you're allowed to sleep there? So I don't know. I thought that was hilarious to see. Now let's get into the lowlights. So I want to talk about the structure. So with this movie is set in multiple years because we have 2014 and when Freddie goes to Korea, and then 2016 with when she has the short haircut, and then 2021 and 2022. So I thought that was an interesting choice to set it multiple years, but I don't know, like for me, if it worked as a connecting story. But after listening to that episode of him on Script Apart, I kind of understand like where he's going for, because I believe in the episode he mentions that he wants to show a portrait of Freddie, I guess during those specific times. But I mean, at the same time, it poses questions on why those specific times, and also leaves questions on, what happened, between those time settings, because in ways it feels like vignettes with each time setting as its own story. That was probably intentional, but I mean, at the same time, it's just I had questions about it. So I guess this is more of a mixed opinion than a full low light. Um, One of my main criticisms is the slow pacing for this movie, because this movie is close to 2 hours long. I felt that it could have been shorter, maybe like an hour 50 tops. Because probably just do some trimming or tightening the scenes. But yeah, I just felt at times it was a bit lengthy, particularly towards the later half of the movie. And I had questions about Freddie's profession because at the beginning she mentions that she was a musician. She's no longer a musician. But then later on, she tells Andre that she does international consulting. And then later on, she's an arms dealer, and I just wondered like what is going on here with Freddie, because it seems like here she's lost and doesn't have a direction in terms of what she wants to do and all that stuff. Because I just wonder, is this because it somehow relates to her being an adoptive kid that's not sure what to do, or is she going through like a rough patch? That was just unclear to me. But I think one thing that is clear, that she comes back to music in some way or some form. So that's all I could say with this point. And lastly, I want to talk about Freddie's mom, because she refuses to connect with Freddie for so long. We don't know why. But then it was nice that they finally reconnect towards the end at Hammond Adoption Center. And she gives her this note that has an email address. And then we see a year later, Freddie tries to email her, but then it turns out the email is invalid. So it makes me wonder, was that intentional? Because if so, what was the point of showing up in the first place? Like, I did not get that. Because if she did not want to meet her at all, just refuse to meet her. I don't know. That's all I have to say for that point and with the low light section. Let's get into trivia, some fun facts. So, the movie is based on the life of Lori Badolfi. Sorry if I mispronounced that name. So, she is a friend of the director. And apparently, like Freddie, she was born in South Korea, stayed a year there before being adopted in France. At 23, she came back and lived for 2 years there before returning to France. A few years after that, the director accompanied her to South Korea when they meet their let me go back to the point. A few years later, after that, the director accompanied her to South Korea when they met her biological father and grandmother. According to him, the meeting was full of emotions of regret and bad communication, with the translator struggling to convey Badolf's anger into polite Korean. Interesting. Also, too, it's the first movie role for Park Ji-min, who is a plastic artist. During pre-production, she had a lot of questions and criticisms regarding the script and pushed the director to identify some cliches about gender roles, seduction, or clothing he unconsciously put in the character Freddie. As a result, the character in the movie is very much a product of the two of them. So I thought that's quite fascinating. Also, too, Park Ji-min was born in Korea but was not adopted, and told New York Times in an interview published on February 19th, 2023, that she had concerns about legitimately portraying someone adopted. She says, quote, "The question of illegitimacy, I had it so strongly from the beginning and still now. There is another actress in the movie, Emmeline Briffaut. She plays a friend of Freddie's and is adopted in real life. I met her twice before the shooting, and I was really, really afraid of her feelings. I felt so illegitimate in front of her. Why am I doing this? It's not my story or my life." Interesting. And lastly, the last part of the story is set and was shot in Romania. This is significant because, like in South Korea, there is a sad history of forced adoptions and parentless children resulting from failed communist population policies and the economic troubles after the communist system was over. Nobody's Children and other features and documentaries are rarely dealt with the subject, so no explicit reference was necessary anymore. By adding the Romania sequence, the filmmakers expand this seemingly Korean story and made it more universal. Interesting, because yeah, when watching that scene in particular, I would not have understand that reference, but just looking to some like, okay, I see it now. Now, lastly, should this movie be rediscovered? And I say yes. So even though I had issues with pacing and structure, I would recommend it because it is quite an emotional story. Um, about a person yearning for a connection, which does go back and forth at times, but at the end, she just wants to be loved. So Yeah, check out the movie. All right, so that pretty much concludes this episode of the podcast. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and Linktree at Nomfanelo. You can find the podcast on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and Linktree at RD Movies Pod. On Spotify, you can answer the feature question, poll, and rate the podcast. On Apple Podcasts, you can leave a review and rate the podcast. You can submit questions, comments, and suggestions by email, which is rediscoveredmovies@gmail.com, or you can leave a short voice message on Spotify for podcasters at RD Movies Pod to be featured on the after show, which will air after the season finale. So I want to say thank you guys so much for tuning in to this episode of the podcast, and I'll catch you on the next one.